My brother, who stole my wife 4 years ago, finally returned home to visit me. He mocked me with my ex until my dad dropped a truth bomb. I'm 32 years old, and until recently, I believed I had a nearly perfect life with my 30-year-old wife, Sarah. We had been married for 5 years, we owned our own home. It wasn't luxurious, but it was ours, and we even had an extraordinary cat, Mincon, whom Sarah gave me for our first anniversary. Lumi, as we called him, was something out of the ordinary. Completely white fur, overflowing intelligence, and without a doubt, the conviction that he ruled the house. Let's be honest, he really did. I worked in software development. I didn't earn like those Silicon Valley geniuses, but it was enough for us to live comfortably. Sarah, for her part, worked as a kindergarten teacher in a well-known school about 20 minutes from home. She was so good at what she did that many parents specifically requested her for their children. Every day she came home with hilarious anecdotes about what the children said or did, and at dinner we would laugh together at those occurrences. Our daily routine seemed perfect. We shared mornings with a cup of coffee before going to work, and Sarah had this endearing habit of stealing a sip of my coffee when she thought I didn't notice, despite having hers right in front of her. She always said that mine had a special flavor. We dedicated weekends to sleeping in a bit later, although Lumi, with his own ideas, decided that breakfast was the ideal time to make pancakes. We enjoyed the everyday activities of a couple. My older brother, Jake, 35, used to show up at the house frequently. He worked at a major investment firm downtown, always impeccably dressed in expensive suits and driving his ostentatious Mercedes. He never stopped talking about mom and dad and seemed convinced he was the greatest blessing to the family business. Our father, owner of a successful construction company, often praised Jake for his financial skills, highlighting how smart he was and how he was doing something important with his life. Although at first I didn't connect the pieces, I began to notice certain signs. Jake would show up unexpectedly at the house when he knew I'd be working late, and he always found the perfect excuse to be present at family dinners. Without fail, he ended up sitting next to Sarah. Also, his comments, although subtle, were loaded with criticism about my house, my car, or my job. Never directly, but insinuating that he would never settle for what I had. You don't expect this kind of attitude from your own brother, right? And every time I said it, Sarah just rolled her eyes and moved closer to me. So I thought everything was fine. We had many plans together. We were saving to buy a bigger house and soon wanted to have children. Sarah had already picked out names, even thinking of naming a son after her grandfather. We had also started visiting houses with larger gardens, convinced that Lumi needed more space to express himself. Although, to be honest, I think Lumi only longed to be able to watch more birds through the window. Every time we went looking for a new house, Sarah had fun showing off different beds and cat toys, as if she expected Lumi to offer decorating advice. It was typical of her to include our cat in all the plans, treating him almost like a child. I thought I had it all: good jobs, a decent house, future plans, and of course a wonderful partner. Sarah seemed happy. We still went out to dinner on our monthly dates, cuddled on the couch watching movies while Lumi stretched out on our lap. And she didn't forget to give me a goodbye kiss each morning or send me love messages during the day. I know that for many this may sound boring without extravagant parties or exotic vacations, but I loved coming home, enjoying the company of Sarah and Lumi, and dreaming of the future we both desired. Yes, it's true that Jake sometimes suggested that I should think big or take more risks, but I was convinced that I had everything I wanted until things changed drastically. I clearly remember one of our date nights at our favorite Italian restaurant, Romano's. It wasn't a fancy place, but the food was spectacular, and the owner, Mario, always saved our table and served us a special garlic bread. That night I decided to surprise Sarah with flowers, since she had had a complicated week dealing with an annoying parent at work. I had also found a keychain shaped like a cat, identical to Lumi, and I knew Sarah would love it. I was walking towards our usual table when I suddenly saw Jake and Sarah sitting in a secluded booth. At first, my mind didn't process the scene. I thought that maybe they had run into each other by chance, or that they were organizing some kind of surprise for my birthday. But seeing how close they were sitting, Jake's hand on Sarah's and her look, a look that used to be only for me, I was paralyzed. I watched them in silence, unable to believe what I was seeing. They weren't aware of my presence as they laughed conspiratorially, absorbed in their conversation. Finally, Sarah looked up and met my gaze with those flowers in my hand, And what she did was shocking. She smiled. It wasn't a smile of shame or guilt, but an almost casual smile, as if she had been waiting for the moment when I discovered the truth. It was then that Jake, with a coldness I could never have imagined, commented, "Ah, brother. It was about time you realized." At that moment I understood that it wasn't just about Sarah, not even about a passing betrayal. It was above all a matter of contempt. Jake wasn't satisfied with having a more expensive car, a higher salary, or Dad's applause. He had decided he deserved to take what I considered mine and make it obvious, usurping my life blatantly. He not only wanted to steal Sarah from me, but to erase my existence. My rage took hold of me. My fists clenched until I felt my nails sink into my hands. My own brother, the person I should trust, had decided that his right was to displace me and take everything from me. And Sarah, instead of opposing him, had allowed it to happen, as if I didn't matter at all. Every man knows there are lines that should not be crossed. You don't play with your brother's wife. You don't destroy someone's life just to prove a point. But Jake never believed in those limits, at least not when it came to me. I'm not proud of what I did next, but at that moment I completely lost control. The betrayal, the arrogance of their glances, the calmness with which they destroyed my world, all came crashing down on me at once. That day my memory is clouded when I try to remember every word I shouted. The only thing I retain is the furious vibration in my voice, my hands so tight that my nails dug into my palms. However, all that was not enough. I needed to do something more. It was then that, without thinking twice, I swept my arm across the table, causing one of those expensive bottles of wine, one of those extravagant acquisitions that Jake surely bought with company money, to topple over, letting out a crash of broken glass. The red wine spread across the table, resembling a river of blood, and immediately all eyes were on us. Jake jumped out of his seat, displaying a feigned indignation, and came towards me with a defiant attitude, criticizing me for overreacting and arguing that having been chosen by Sarah, his behavior was justified. That accusation was the straw that broke the camel's back. I lost control and lunged at him, pushing him with such force that he crashed into a chair, showing for a brief moment a glimmer of fear in his eyes. But before I could continue, the restaurant staff intervened, separating us and demanding that we leave. It was Sarah's inaction. She sat there with her arms crossed and her lips pursed in that annoyed expression she used to show when something as insignificant as forgetting to take out the trash disturbed her night. At that very moment I understood that for her, neither I nor the situation mattered. Upon arriving home, Lumi, my faithful cat, immediately perceived that something was wrong. Always so astute, he became my shadow, following me around the house while I paced back and forth, trying to decipher the chaos inside me. That same night, Sarah didn't come home, nor the next. Eventually, she went directly to Jake's place. It was as if everything had been premeditated for a long time. The next day, I started receiving a series of messages that I still keep. Jake, in a conciliatory tone, tried to justify what happened. He reminded me of the special connection that, according to him, he shared with Sarah, and that, in his opinion, was superior to my monotonous 9-to-5 existence. He reproached me, saying that in his world, Sarah deserved something more ambitious. Meanwhile, both he and Sarah tried to explain themselves through calls and messages, trying to convince me that love sometimes appears without warning, leaving aside all logic. He even came up with some absurd phrase like brothers before na, arguing that true love transcends everything. I, however, opted for silence, taking refuge on the sofa with Lumi on my lap, trying to assimilate how my life was falling apart. The feeling of helplessness became unbearable. It wasn't just the loss of Sarah or the fact that Jake had her, but the perception of having failed, of not having been enough for her or for my own family. That burning feeling of inadequacy consumed me day after day. In the following weeks, the situation got even more complicated. One day, while I was at work, Sarah showed up at my house and collected a large part of her belongings. She even tried to take Lumi, but my neighbor, the ever-attentive Mrs. Chan, noticed what was happening and alerted me immediately. When I got home, I found Sarah trying to force my cat into a carrier, while Lumi, with unwavering determination, refused to abandon me. It was at that precise moment that I drew my line. I told Sarah that she could take whatever she wanted except Lumi, who was completely mine. That cat was my anniversary gift, registered in my name, and with all the veterinary records in my favor. Although Sarah tried to argue that since she had chosen him, the cat partly belonged to her, I made it clear that that was my limit. Meanwhile, Jake kept showing up at my work, trying to explain and convince me with phrases like, "You'll thank me later," or assuring me that Sarah had always been destined to be with someone like him. To say that his behavior disgusted me is an understatement. The situation worsened when I noticed that, in the midst of all this, some of my relatives sided with Jake. My mother tried to downplay the situation, justifying his behavior with comments like, "You know how Jake is," while my father seemed more concerned about the impact on the family business than about my well-being. Only my sister Katie was clear in drawing a line. She told Jake that for her, he was already lost. The legal battle that followed was a true ordeal. Sarah hired an extremely aggressive lawyer who tried to seize half of my savings, demand my car, which I had acquired before meeting her, and even tried to justify that, due to the emotional support Sarah had given me during my career advancements, she was entitled to financial compensation. The situation reached an unusual point when Sarah's lawyer argued in court that, since she had been the one to choose Lumi, she had a certain emotional right over the cat. The move quickly backfired when I presented all the documentation that proved that Lumi was my gift, with veterinary records and registration papers that supported my ownership. Sarah's expression upon seeing that she couldn't take my cat was the first crack in her impeccable facade. Throughout the entire judicial process, Jake was present at every hearing, always in Sarah's shadow, trying in the hallways to convince me with words like, "Come on, let's be reasonable," or reminding me that I was still his brother, as if that could repair the damage. Meanwhile, they strutted on social media, posting about their love story and sharing cheesy messages about how the heart sometimes follows its own path. On one occasion, Jake even published a lengthy reflection on the true meaning of love, tagging Sarah, which made me feel such immense fury that I wanted to throw my phone to the floor. I remember that at one point, Lumi knocked it out of my hands as if he knew it wasn't good for me. Finally, after 2 months of endless arguments, a divorce agreement was reached. I managed to keep the house, purchased with my own savings before the marriage, my car, and of course Lumi. Sarah kept her car and what she had already removed from the house, but her claims for more were quickly rejected by her lawyer. This is where the situation took an unexpected turn. Remember that Jake had been in charge of finances at Dad's construction company. Shortly after the divorce was finalized, photos began to circulate of a vacation in the Maldives that Jake and Sarah were posting on their social networks. The funny thing is that, following those posts, Dad noticed some discrepancies in the company accounts. Small anomalies that, when added up, had no explanation. It turned out that the trip they were bragging about cost more than Jake earned in an entire year. Meanwhile, I began to focus on my work, moving away from the family home, and thanks to that I got a promotion. It seemed that by freeing myself from an unfaithful wife and a treacherous brother, my life was beginning to reorganize. Lumi and I established a routine that included morning cuddles, work-from-home days, although sometimes the cat sat on my keyboard during video conferences, and evening walks around the neighborhood, where Lumi followed me with unwavering loyalty. Even my sister Katie began to visit me more frequently, becoming my main support, to the point that she won Lumi's affection, sometimes more than mine. A short time later, rumors began to surface about possible irregularities in Jake's work. At first, they were just whispers about accounts that didn't add up, missing receipts, and suspicious transfers. Dad, although reluctant to talk about the subject, began to spend more time in the office and to meet with the accountants. At the same time, the idyllic image that Sarah and Jake used to project on social media began to crumble little by little. The posts, dozens of elegant and personal success stories, began to fade. One day, while working from home, I received an unexpected call from Dad. In a serious tone I had never heard from him. He told me that there was a family meeting the next day, and he insistently reminded me that I had to attend, adding, "Your brother will be present." Although I tried to refuse, Dad was adamant. "This is not optional. And believe me, you'll want to be there to face what's coming." Reluctantly and apprehensive, I understood that it was time to face the consequences of everything that had happened, especially after the announcement of Jake and Sarah's engagement, made barely 3 months after my divorce was finalized. That day, it was noticeable that things were moving very fast. But Dad wouldn't take no for an answer. The morning had been strange. Lumi, as if sensing the tension, had been unusually quiet, glued to my side. But it was something worse. Upon arriving, the first thing that caught my attention was Jake's Mercedes, the same one he bragged so much about, parked awkwardly as if he had run out. They were already there when I entered, Jake and Sarah on the sofa, behaving as if they owned the place. Jake, in an expensive suit, and Sarah decked out in designer brands, began to make their typical comments as soon as I walked through the door. "Hey loser, still driving that Toyota?" Jake said with a smug smile while his fiancée added, "And how is it going? Is the cat still your only company?" Very mature. I clenched my jaw and took a deep breath. For years, I had prepared myself for this encounter, convincing myself that if I ever saw them again, I would not let myself be affected by their trivial insults. I was about to leave because something didn't feel right when Dad appeared. I should explain that my father is not one to raise his voice, but when he wants attention, it's enough for you to just shut up. He sat at his desk, the same one he used to help us with our homework when we were kids, and took out a thick portfolio that he placed on the table in the middle of all of us. The atmosphere became tense. After a few moments of silence, Dad fixed his gaze on Jake and said, "Do you want to explain the Anderson contract to me?" Jake's face transformed, trying to force a mocking smile, but without success. "And what about it?" he replied, while Dad pulled out some papers that showed interesting figures. The contract amounted to $2.4 million, but our books only recorded $1.8 million received. "Can you explain?" Dad insisted. Sarah shifted uncomfortably in her seat, and Jake, with a nonchalant gesture, waved his hand. "It's probably an accounting error. I already checked it." "I already did it myself," Dad replied as he pulled out more documents, one after the other, including details on the Wilson project and 20 other contracts from the last year. The room fell silent. Jake's nervous expression became evident, and Sarah was clutching her designer bag with such force that it was impossible not to notice. Then Dad, in an almost serene voice, although his words weighed more than a shout, said, "You thought you could steal from your own family?" Jake tried to laugh but was interrupted. Dad continued, showing on his laptop a series of transactions. Fake accounts, money diverted from every important contract, Mercedes payments, trips to the Maldives, Sarah's extravagant purchases. All paid for with company funds through a complicated system of altered accounts and invoices. Sarah tried to intervene, but Dad raised his hand. "Your situation too, with that separate account in your name that receives regular transfers from our accounts." I watched incredulously as Jake's facade crumbled. For years he had bragged about his financial genius and business skills, only to discover that all he was doing was stealing from Dad. Jake insisted once more. "Dad, I can explain it. We can fix this. The company is better than ever." I leaned back in my chair, watching him sweat through his excessively expensive suit. This was the man who had stolen my wife, who for years looked at me with disdain. I let out a low, bitter laugh. "So you thought you were the man? How ironic." Jake's face tightened. He tried to say something but no words came out. For the first time he couldn't justify himself. He had no arguments to save him. Then Dad, picking up another paper, said, "And what about Mom's medical fund? To give you some context, our mother passed away a few months before Jake and Sarah started their affair. She was sick, requiring expensive treatments, and Dad had established a special fund, depositing around $5,000 monthly. Jake had been entrusted with managing those payments, given his supposed financial skill. However, the statements that Dad took out showed that the money never reached the hospital, but was diverted directly to Jake's personal accounts. While Mom struggled in the hospital, he used those funds to buy elegant suits and take Sarah on luxurious dates. I felt a sharp pain in my stomach. The abuse was already too much, but using the money intended for Mom's care was an even greater betrayal. Jake began to stammer, inventing excuses about an error in the accounts and promising to reimburse, claiming that the treatments weren't working. Sarah, her face pale, seemed not to know whether to be surprised or if she cared deep down. But Dad wasn't finished. With another move, he played images from the security cameras of a luxury hotel downtown on his laptop. The recording, dated the same night Mom was in the hospital, showed Jake and Sarah elegantly dressed, laughing and dancing. Meanwhile, I was with Mom and Dad trying to contact Jake to come say goodbye. Although the video lasted barely a minute, It felt interminable. After watching it, the silence stretched for what seemed like an eternity. I felt sick, unable to believe how far my brother's betrayal had gone. Trying one last time to salvage the situation, Jake said, "Dad, I'm your son. The successful son." To which Dad, in a voice so low that it was chilling, replied, "The son who robbed his dying mother. The son who embezzled from our family business." Then calmly, Dad picked up an envelope that had been on his desk the entire time. "This is my will. Do you want to know what it contains?" Jake tried to force a smile, but it was evident that something was wrong with his face. "Don't be dramatic. We can fix this. I'll pay everything back. Everything will go to your brother," Dad said. With those words, the company, the house, and everything else were in my hands. Sarah immediately stood up. "You can't do that. We'll fight. We'll call lawyers." Dad let out a laugh that didn't promise anything good. Rather, it was a challenge. "Lawyers? I already spoke with them. They have copies of all the evidence. There are even FBI agents very interested in this fraud," he stated, leaving Jake breathless. The transformation in his face was almost comical. He went from red to white in an instant, while Sarah began to gasp, unable to breathe. Jake, with a trembling voice, could barely stammer, "You're bluffing." To which Dad stood up from his seat. He wasn't a tall man, but at that moment he seemed imposing. "You wouldn't do this to yourself or to this family. Now get out of my house." Sarah grabbed her bag and ran out of the room, while Jake remained paralyzed for a moment, not believing what was happening. When he tried to speak, Dad interrupted him. "If you ever come near this family again, I assure you that you will spend the next 20 years in prison. Get out." Jake left without a word, and I sat there trying to absorb everything. Dad, with a chilling calmness, refiled all the documents as if nothing had happened. That same night, when I arrived home, Lumi was waiting for me by the door as always. He jumped on my lap and started purring frantically, as if at least my little comfort had returned. However, the consequences were devastating. The first major repercussion was the loss of Jake's job. Dad didn't just fire him. He also had the company lawyers report everything to the authorities. Apparently, stealing money from the company and manipulating medical funds is a serious crime. Jake initially tried to downplay it, posting messages on LinkedIn about new opportunities and moments of change, but in the construction business, the truth spreads quickly. No one had to try hard to discover what had really happened. The Mercedes disappeared out of nowhere, as is typical when you buy cars with stolen money, since banks don't allow you to keep them. In addition, Sarah published a long and angry post on Facebook. It all started with the decision to simplify her lifestyle and demonstrate that material things lack importance when you have true love. Of course, after deciding to leave behind the complications, they bought a luxurious, not at all modest house, right after they started their relationship. The house was so big that it was beyond their economic means, but Jake had managed to steal enough to be able to afford it. However, the bank ended up taking it, forcing them to move into a small apartment on the other side of the city. The real chaos broke loose when the FBI got involved. Remember all the evidence Dad had gathered? It turned out that the feds were very interested in how Jake moved the money. One day they arrived at his new apartment with a search warrant. My sister Katie, the best of all, who works at a nearby coffee shop, witnessed everything. According to what she told me, Jake was trying to argue with the FBI agents, while Sarah just stood there crying. Katie even recorded the scene on video, which has not been published for legal reasons. Seeing Jake try to justify the presence of forged documents from a shell company in his apartment was undoubtedly an almost comical experience. In addition, the couple's friends began to disappear. Those people who at one point supported their true love, leaving encouraging comments, suddenly stopped appearing. It seems that when they could no longer be invited to expensive dinners, loyalty disappeared by magic. Approximately a month after these events, Sarah contacted me, sending me a long and convoluted message in which she claimed not to have known anything about the theft and presented herself as a victim, just like any of us. By then, word had already spread that I had been named in Dad's will, inheriting a considerable part of the business. Suddenly, the same woman who had destroyed my life wanted to reopen old wounds. Although she never said it openly, the subtext was clear. "I made a mistake, but maybe we can fix things. I decided not to answer her. Although I did send her a photo of Lumi, my cat, sleeping peacefully on my desk in the office. That's how Dad appointed me head of finance after Jake's departure. And now my cat enjoys a much better life than theirs. And for me, that represents perfect justice. Destiny, however, had its own ironic twist prepared. A few days later, I ran into Sarah at a downtown coffee shop. But she wasn't alone. She was accompanied by someone new. A woman who embodied everything Sarah never was. Upon seeing us, Sarah froze. Her eyes scanned my companion and me, who was laughing at some comment of mine. For the first time since she left, she seemed hesitant. I maintained eye contact with her for a moment and then went back to focusing on my date as if she didn't exist. At that precise moment, I understood that she finally got it. She was never special. She was simply a mistake from the past that I managed to overcome. The situation worsened for Jake, who was arrested 2 weeks ago and faces serious charges, with the possibility of spending decades in prison. His lawyer is still trying to negotiate some kind of deal, but the evidence is overwhelming. Jake wasn't as skilled with technology as he thought, and the FBI managed to gather all the necessary evidence. The day after his arrest, Sarah filed for divorce and posted a long message on Facebook in which she related her feelings of betrayal and the healing process in the face of the trauma suffered, conveniently omitting to mention the luxury perch. Fiancée's financed with stolen money. Soon it became known that she had gone back to live with her parents. Ironically, karma seemed to act poetically. About 2 weeks after Jake's imprisonment, I received a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something prompted me to do so. It was from the county jail, and on the other end of the line, Jake's voice had changed radically. That arrogant and overbearing tone was gone, leaving behind a small broken voice. While petting Lumi, who was resting on my lap, I could barely articulate a response. "Yeah, you screwed up." It was at that moment that Jake started to really cry, apologizing for having allowed things to get out of control, explaining that he had only wanted to demonstrate his success. He even mentioned Mom, assuring me that he thought about her every night from his cell. I'm convinced that he had rehearsed that speech for days. When he finished, I replied, reminding him of a phrase he himself told me that night at Romano's. "This is really awkward," and I hung up. Jake's lawyer called me the next day, trying to convince me to speak in his favor during sentencing, mentioning family ties and second chances. I, however, simply laughed and hung up again. According to him, Jake will face a minimum sentence of 15 to 20 years. The fraud charges were serious, but what angered the prosecutors the most was the theft from the medical fund intended for Mom's care in her last moments, something that the judges clearly didn't like. Sarah tried to paint herself as innocent at first. She changed her last name back, deleted all the photos in which Jake appeared, and told anyone who would listen that she was unaware of the thefts. However, the FBI discovered emails showing that she collaborated with Jake to move the money. Her trial will take place next month, and according to the lawyers, the outlook isn't encouraging for her. In contrast, my life has taken a very positive turn. The company is better than ever. It's surprising what can be achieved when no one is embezzling millions. Dad has taught me everything related to management, and to my surprise, I enjoy every moment of running it. The numbers really make sense when they are genuine. I even bought a new house, nothing as ostentatious as Jake and Sarah's, but perfect for me and Lumi. The house has a huge window in the living room that Lumi loves to spend hours watching the birds through. Although he occasionally criticizes me for not catching them, I've started dating again. Nothing too serious, but it's a relief to be with someone who doesn't bring with them betrayals or ulterior motives. My sister Katie continues to be an unconditional support, and besides visiting, she's obsessed with Lumi, always bringing him new toys and treats. Although Lumi pretends to despise them, he becomes playful as soon as she leaves, as is typical of him. Dad is also doing well now. He smiles more often, having left all the drama behind, and he's already talking about retiring soon to give me full control of the company, assuring me that the company needs young blood that understands true values. He was almost certainly throwing a dig at Jake. Mom would undoubtedly have approved of how things have turned out, as she always insisted that honesty was worth more than any material success. Still, there are times when I can't help but remember everything. How Jake and Sarah thought they were superior, how they looked down on me for leading a normal life, and all those times they made me feel insignificant. But now, sitting in my office watching Lumi chase a ray of sunshine across my desk while I run the company, I've understood something fundamental. You don't succeed through cheating, stealing, or hurting others, but by being true to yourself and doing things the right way. Sometimes the best revenge is simply living well, and having a cat that considers you the best person in the world, even if his ways of showing it are limited to enjoying treats and allowing me to clean his litter box. I want to thank everyone for their support, and for the recognition I've received. And to conclude on a final note, I will not share on social media, nor any detailed information about Sarah or Jake's situation in jail. It isn't worth reviving the drama. By the way, yes, Lumi is still the undisputed boss of the company. He attended his first board meeting last week. He slept through almost the entire session, but he still made decisions that undoubtedly surpassed all of Jake's.